Resource Center, and we play America's original music.
Where'd the old town go? They moved it all north of here in a shopping mall. Ooh, where'd the old town go? Did my hometown get old, or just me? Did all my friends get old, or just me? Are they all gonna have to be told, or just me?
Good morning and welcome to Old Town Cleveland here on Whoop FM 99.9, or you can go to the internet at www.whoopfm.com. You can call us here this morning at 614-5553. Good morning, Deb. Tell us what's going on.
Good morning, Ron. This morning it's December the 7th, 2013, and we have a very special guest in the studio today. We have Dr. Hood from UTC, and we're going to be talking about Appalachian folks, and the religion and the culture, maybe the music, whatever you guys want to talk about this morning, and that should be a lot of fun. Today is the day of the Christmas parade.
Yes.
And go out and make some memories tonight about 6 p.m., judging on how cold it is right now, be sure to bundle the kids up. But at 6 o'clock tonight, they'll be having the Christmas parade on its regular route. If you don't know, just go downtown and you'll see all the other folks around the courthouse. And also tomorrow, Lee University is offering a Christmas concert at 3 p.m. at the Con Center. I'm not sure if that's free or not, but it would be well worth whatever they might charge to get in. And we're just glad to have you here today,
Right.
Dr. Hood.
And this is also, it was mentioned, Pearl Harbor Day and everything, so honor all of our veterans. No, today, December 7th.
Oh, yes.
Yes,
Right.
it
Day
is.
to live in.
So please, if you...
And we
if
still
there is any-
have
one?
one survivor of Pearl Harbor living here in town, Mr. Allen, George Allen.
Right. A couple of years ago, we had two, so every year that goes away.
And we've had
so-
them both on the show.
So thank you so much to those people who serve in any conflict. Good morning, Dr. Hood. How are you, sir?
Good morning. I'm glad to be here.
Well, we've been excited about getting you here, too. You know, you're a legend, aren't you?
Well,
In his own mind, baby.
yeah,
No.
But at
we're-
least, at
I'm
least
sorry.
in my mind sometimes.
Well, that's good. You know, if you've ever watched any documentary about snake handling churches, you usually see Dr. Hood in there eventually. You've been in a lot of those, and probably one of the leading experts in serpent handling in the country.
Yeah, one of my interests is my major interest in psychology is psychology of religion. And when I came to Tennessee, there had been some publicity surrounding two deaths at Carson Springs, and people were commenting on serpent handling and saying things that sounded very strange to me. And so what I decided to do was to try to document this tradition so that I could present to outsiders a more objective and balanced view of who these people are, what their beliefs are, and what their practices are.
Where is Carson Springs?
It's now up near Newport, Tennessee.
Near
Newport,
Newport.
yeah. Yeah, yeah.
We were up there not too long ago.
Del Rio, Newport,
Rio, yes.
Dandridge, all that area
Yes,
through
yes.
there.
And there's
Yeah.
some serpent handling churches up there now. Jimmy Morrill's church is in Del Rio.
Right.
There's one in Morristown.
Yeah. Now, you tell us where you come from originally. Where was you born? Where was you raised?
Well, actually, I was born in Colorado, but I was raised in Southern California and went to school in Southern California, and then came in the early 70s to Tennessee. And so I consider myself a Tennessee old-timer now.
Yeah, so
He
now-
wasn't born here, but he got here as soon as he could.
Right. So
It
now,
was a good choice.
Did you come originally to teach at UTC?
Yes, I came to teach at UTC, and I fell in love both with the university and with the region around here, and decided to stay and have no intent to ever leave.
Now, we've run into some of your former students, and online they've talked to you, and most of them said they loved you.
Well, they have good taste.
The one-
What can I say?
The ones you give good grades to loved you.
I think there's a bias there.
Yeah, there
Yeah.
probably is, you know,
Yeah.
but and earlier I asked you about the people of Appalachia, and you studied this thing and how they were different than some other people there. And tell us what you told me about that.
Yeah, a little bit. There's a danger of trying to make Appalachia too different and make it into kind of a third world undeveloped country and not really part of the progress that we identify with the United States. But in fact, there is some uniqueness to Appalachia, and I think it's partly due to a fierce independence, a desire to not let things be imposed upon themselves, the great Scot-Irish tradition of coming to the region and being self-sufficient, rejecting the imposition of authority, and actually being part of a culture that is largely misunderstood because it does provide for many, many people an overarching, satisfying life.
I think, when you look back at it, and you said it great, is about the retirement thing. You tell me what you said about that.
Well, one of the argument always is people going to Appalachia and wanting to develop it as if somehow it's part of an undeveloped land. And one of my favorite stories is of a lady being confronted with the notion of what the outside world could do for her. And she said, whenever somebody comes to Appalachia, they always tell me that when they retire, they'd like to have a cabin up in the mountains by a stream. And she says, I'm here in a cabin up in the mountains by a stream. You don't have anything to give me.
A lot of the poverty that come through here is that, that we didn't have roads, we didn't have communications. And, of course, I guess the 40s started with the dam projects, and then the atomic age come to Oak Ridge, and then I think that helped change a little bit. But there's still a lot of people live up in the mountains that just didn't want to take part.
Yeah, I think one of the unique things about Appalachia is the fact that they resist many forms of modernity. And so that they're interested in a lifestyle that's fairly self-sufficient. I know people who have cut the trees, used the wood to build their own house, who are garden, raise animals, hunt, and are virtually self-sufficient, almost never have to pay income tax, and can survive on their own, and they do that in a way that's very satisfying and meaningful.
The original preppers.
Yeah.
Right. Well, yeah.
That they just took care of themselves. They don't rely on anyone else to take care of them. I think that's true. Now, for someone that may not have a clue, where is Appalachia? What do you consider
Appalachian? Well, it's hard to define Appalachia. It's both a geographical region running all the way from, Alabama up through Ohio. It's also a kind of cultural point of view. So there are no direct boundaries to Appalachia, but it certainly is that thing that runs north-south through the eastern part of America that is linked with shifting boundaries, but overall a fairly unique kind of cultural lifestyle that Americans have consistently been attracted to.
You said earlier that, all parts of the country have poverty and literacy problems, but no different in Appalachia. Was the numbers bigger here, or is it just we were more compacted?
No. One of the interesting things about Appalachia is they have the same range of characteristics that other cultural areas have. So to identify Appalachia as disproportionately linked to poverty is not true. Part of their poverty is linked to a chosen lifestyle. They're less materialistic, less interested in having large houses or fancy cars. So there is a notion that in Appalachia there is a rejection of much modernity. And then, of course, they've largely been exploited by the outside. So people come into Appalachia and they want the lumber and they want the coal. And what they do is they come and extract the resources from Appalachia, but never feed it back in to the Appalachian community. So it's actually been one of the great exploited areas of America. And when the coal is mined and the land is destroyed, right, then the people are just left to do the best they can on their own.
And the jobs disappear.
And all the wealth is taken out of Appalachia and not fed back into Appalachia.
Now, you said something about the religion of the mountains in here. And tell us about, you study a lot of the psychology of religion. That's one of your interest or your areas of study.
Yes.
So tell us about the religion of the region.
Well, my area of study is psychology of religion. That's what interests me the most. And I'm also trained as a social psychologist. So I take a very cultural and social view of religion and how it influences individuals and gives them a way to meaningfully frame their own life. And Deborah McCauley has probably done an excellent job in identifying what she calls Appalachian Mountain religion. And she argues it's a fairly unique form of American religious expression. And I think she's right. And it's unique in several ways. One of the ways it's unique is it takes a fairly plain view of Scripture. So there are people in Appalachia who may be seen to be illiterate, but have worn Bibles that they have literally memorized, the way some maybe Islamic person would have memorized the Quran. And I've seen people, coal miners, with Bibles that are taped together with duct tape, that are just worn thin from continual reading. And so Appalachian Mountain religion is something that is biblically based and stands resistant to any effort to impose interpretations or authority for the outside. So, for instance, in many forms of Appalachian Mountain religion, people are called to preach. They feel called to preach. They're not paid to preach. And their success is dependent upon having a church that people will attend. And the judgment from people in Appalachian Mountain churches always is, are you preaching the Word? Do you have the Word? And can you give the Word to us? So the notion that you would train people, educate them, and give the more liberal interpretation of, let's say, Scripture, is something very foreign to Appalachian Mountain religion. It's a religion that emerged from the indigenous people. It frames their life and gives them a sense of meaning that helps sustain a culture that is really distinct in America.
Now, would these people tend to be Southern Baptists or Methodists or Catholics, or would they just reject that organized religion?
All of the religions that we're used to in America are in Appalachia because they go to Appalachia and try to convert. So you will find Catholics, you will find Methodists, and you will find Baptists. But there's also many of the unique smaller denominations and sects in Appalachia. So you don't still have, Southern Baptists, you have Primitive Baptists. And one of the most unique forms of American religious expression, arguably the most unique, is the Appalachians who handle serpents as a direct response to the Gospel of Mark.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Is there a lot of serpent handling churches?
Nobody. One of the interesting things about the serpent handling churches is they're not centralized. They keep no documents. They stay off the map, so to speak. But I would guess today, probably scattered throughout Appalachia, are probably 125 churches that endorse the practice of handling serpents. And many are small. There'll be 2 or 3 or 4 that meet in a home. And then there's significant larger churches that I call hub churches, where they're linked with powerful serpent-handling families. And they're scattered in Sand Mountain has Glenn Summerford's church, in Morristown, Tennessee, Del Rio, Tennessee, in Middlesboro, Kentucky, in Marshall, North Carolina. So the churches try to stay under the radar, so to speak, because they can get in trouble with legal authorities, because in every state except West Virginia, where serpent handling has been practiced, states have been able to pass laws legislating against the practice of handling.
Now, if you were
it's handling snakes, not the religion, though, right?
Well, the United States has a very strange position with respect to religious belief that is largely misunderstood. The Supreme Court has made it clear that they do not recognize any heresy. So that means the Americans have the absolute right to their religious beliefs. So the court, even when ruling against serpent handlers, has never commented on their belief that they should have the right to handle. But the courts have systematically ruled that if they have what they call a compelling interest, they can control and legislate against the practice. So, for instance, in the state of Tennessee, you're absolutely free to believe in the Gospel of Mark and in taking up serpents. But the state of Tennessee has systematically ruled that it is illegal to handle a serpent in a fashion to endanger the self or others. So that means you can believe in serpent handling, but you cannot actually practice serpent handling.
Doesn't it sort of say is that you can't handle snakes in a public setting?
Well, in Tennessee, it doesn't specify a setting. But for instance, the first law in Kentucky, which clearly, in my view, is unconstitutional, says it is illegal to use a reptile in a religious service. Now, that's the only state that specifies religious service. And it's absurd in the sense that if your child brought a turtle to a Bible study course, then they are violating the law. But all other states have passed laws against the handling of serpents without specifying religion. But there are two other interesting exceptions. North Carolina and Georgia had a law that said it was illegal to induce or entice handling. And the Georgia law said that if somebody induced someone to handle serpents, that is, preached from the Gospel of Mark, and they actually handled serpents and got bit, the person who preached the gospel would be guilty of murder.
Yes.
And actually there were two court cases where that was tried, both ending in a hung jury.
Very interesting. And I was just going to ask about the differences. Do the folks who are practicing the serpent handling in the homes are less harassed, you think?
Well, they practice in their homes for two reasons. They may not have a church, and they simply meet in their home. And secondly, the harassment of serpent handlers usually comes from publicity surrounding a bite or a death.
Right.
So as long as people handle serpents and there is no difficulty that occurs, they can stay under the radar. But once someone is bit and it becomes public knowledge, then the authorities tend to want to enforce the law. So, for instance, in Tennessee, the Chattanooga Press has always been the press that followed serpent handling, gave it publicity, and then that publicity led authorities to clamp down on the churches.
You come from Southern California, and you got to Tennessee, and had you studied any about snake handling or serpent handling before you got here, or is that just something you started realizing in...
I studied religion, all religions, and I did not know about serpent handling religions. Mm-hmm. But when I came to Tennessee, as I mentioned, there had been 2 deaths at Carson Springs. And what bothered me is we had authorities at my university, one a distinguished professor of religion, commenting on the practice, saying that these people misunderstood the Gospel of Mark, didn't realize that it was a later edition, all of this higher order kind of academic criticism. Mm-hmm. And then a sociologist was commenting on the fact that these people were impoverished and ignorant and didn't know better, and this was an emotional outlet for them. And I asked both of those authorities, so to speak, had they ever been to a serpent handling church? And they said no. They had never talked to a serpent handler. They had never attended a service. They were just imposing from the outside their academic perspective. So I said, one of the things I want to do is to get to know these people, to understand their practice, and be able to document it both to the other psychologists of religion and then to outsiders who may have a misunderstanding of the sincerity and depth and legitimacy of a practice that most of the serpent handlers will say, if you don't believe in it, don't do it, but just pray for those who do.
Yeah. Now, where was the first time you went and actually saw it happen? And did you sit in the back of the room or?
Well, actually, the first time I went to a serpent handling service, it was down in Kingston, Georgia. It was a very powerful church, and Carl Porter was the pastor. And I sat right up front, and watched what went on, and I was amazed because it is an amazing thing to see, but I felt quite safe and protected because serpent handlers are always in control of the serpent, and if you're in a serpent handling church, you're not endangered, and there's no reported case of a non-handler in a serpent handling church ever being bit by a serpent.
How hard was it? I mean, is it easy to go in to see this, or are they just a little bit shy about outsiders?
Well, it's mixed. Serpent handling churches are like any other church. They would welcome you. They want you to come, and they would love to preach the gospel and would actually like to see you at some point become converted and handle a serpent. On the other hand, they're well aware that a lot of people come to a serpent handling church because they're curious. They come with cameras. They may be reporters, and not only wanting to see people handle serpents, but actually hoping somebody gets bit, kind of like people that go to car races to see a wreck. And so serpent handling churches are cautious. If you're there for legitimate religious reasons, they will welcome you. But if you come with an agenda or a camera, then they'll probably not let you keep the camera, not take any pictures, and then not be willing to cooperate with you in terms of giving interviews, etc., because they recognize that they usually get a very poor press.
Absolutely. Well, who are the Appalachian people? Where did they come from?
Well, they come from, like all of us, they're immigrants, but many of them are Scotch-Irish immigrants, for instance, and they got into the Appalachian Mountains, and they found a region that was very similar to their region. They continued practices that were similar to their region. For instance, Appalachia has been and still is full of moonshiners, people that make their own liquor, and the reason they did it, the Irish thought it was absurd that the government could refuse to allow you to make your own liquor, or even worse, to tax it. They would think that it's absurd that they can't make their moonshine. It just like somebody else would think it's absurd that they can't plant their corn. So they brought their cultural practices with them, but then ran into difficulties with the larger culture, both, for instance, with taxing liquor, and then with the case of the serpent handlers, with the culture saying, here's a religious practice that we will refuse to allow you to engage in.
I was very fortunate to have the opportunity to go to Ireland a few years ago, and I certainly saw that there was a difference in the materialistic points of view of Americans and the Irish folks. They live very simplistically, or the ones that I visited with.
Good morning. You're live on Old Town Cleveland.
Guess who?
Oh, it must be Miss Ella.
Yes, it is.
Well, now, Ralph, you'll be safe today. She's a cougar. She likes younger men.
Okay, that's good. That's good. Well, I'm young for a redwood.
For Redwood.
Hey, I had so much fun last night.
Where'd you go?
Where is there to go?
I guess you went to Pokey's.
Oh, yeah.
How many beers did you have last night?
3.
3. Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, and I finally got to dance with somebody I've been wanting to dance with. I ain't going to say who. He may not like it. But.
Oh, well, you go ahead and say it. Nobody's listening this morning.
Mark Grissom.
Oh, Mark Grissom. Is that your secret love?
You should always dance with the funeral home director.
And Cinnamon and Pro Daddy was there, and I got a picture with me and Pro Daddy.
Well, then, did you slow dance with Mark, or was it a fast dance?
It was a fast day.
Oh, okay.
If the music's playing, Miss Ella's dancing.
Is that true?
Oh, yeah.
Every dance.
It was on the radio.
So you ready for Christmas?
Hey, you know where I'm going for Christmas.
California?
Yeah.
Oh, that's good. Where are you going in California?
Where are you going?
The 17th of December.
What part?
Palmdale.
Okay.
That's down by L.A.
Down by L.A. Okay.
I was
Miss Ella
raised in
gets-
L.A., so I know that area well.
Miss Ella gets on the bus and she calls us live on the radio from the bus, all the way out there.
Okay.
I told Mark, though, I wouldn't be able to call him because he's on too early in the morning.
Yeah, that'd be a little early for you. All right, Miss.
Well, it's 3 hours difference, so I got to get up.
Yeah, that's a little early.
Miss Ellie, have you ever went to a snake handling church?
What?
You ever been to a snake handling church?
No, and I don't want to either. No.
All right, well.
I got a friend that used to ramble all the time, go from place to place, and he used to eat snakes.
Ooh.
Eat snakes?
Were they dead?
Well, I don't know. I didn't eat them, but he did.
All right, Miss Ellis. Good talking to you this morning.
Bye, Miss Ella.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
All right, Ralph, have you ever picked one up in a service yet?
No, and there's a reason I don't do that. It took me a long time to work into be friends with these people, to let them know that I respected their beliefs. But since I did not want to mock their faith, I don't handle serpents.
I think
but
that's
I'm
wise.
with people that do, and what I try to do and what we've done at the university is document this tradition. I participate in their services, but they understand that I don't share their beliefs in the sense that I'm going to handle a serpent.
Right. Another call coming in here. Good morning. You're live on Old Town Cleveland.
Good morning.
Hey, my bird niece. How are you?
I'm here.
Ron stuttering this
I know,
morning.
You got your regulars.
Good morning, Miss
You're-
Denise.
She said she's not going to handle snakes.
No. I'd ask them where they want another door at.
I've heard that before.
You guys all right?
We're doing great, Bernice.
Well, we're doing pretty good. I can't see much, but I'm doing pretty good.
Well, you give our friend a hug for us.
I will. He's going to help an elderly lady today. He's elderly, but he's going to help an elderly lady.
He's a good guy.
Yeah, he's going to help a lady that's 96 years old that can't even walk. She's in a wheelchair, and she has nobody.
Well,
So we're going to help her today.
She's got somebody now.
Yeah,
good.
she has. And we left.
Well, and I guess that makes him feel young being around her.
Yeah, he does. He'll have a birthday the 14th. He'll be 84 years old, honey.
Well, bless your heart.
Yeah. I love you guys.
Love you
Okay,
too.
bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, darling.
Bye. Her husband sets up at the farmer's market, and we usually get a fruit and vegetable report every Saturday morning,
really?
but now we're beyond that. We always love to hear about the beans and the taters
Makes
and
me
the
happy.
corn. And
Have you learned to eat okra yet?
oh yeah, of course.
You got
of course.
okra and gravy and grits, all
And
that.
yeah, those are essential. And one of the best things about a serpent handling church is homecoming.
All right.
The meals are fantastic.
Good morning. You're live on Old Town Cleveland.
Hey, Ron, how you doing, buddy?
Hey,
Hey,
Bullet.
Bullet.
How are you?
I just want to call in and say hello to two of my favorite people, you and Deb.
I didn't know you knew Ralph over here.
Really?
No, not to get off your subject, but I heard that Northwest got beat last night.
Yeah, 28-27. Henry County beat them there. So good football game, I understand. So, but there must have been a good football team.
Well, I actually watched a little bit. I had to go to Sky Ridge last night, and I watched a little bit on the TV. And but when I watched, it was Knoxville was leading 14-0. And I heard they went for an extra point or mixed or extra point or something.
Yeah, that happens sometime.
But it was a good showing by Knox West, and I don't know much what where is a church we can go see them handle snakes?
Well, Del Rio or
Which is
Newport.
East Tennessee, Upper East
Yeah,
Tennessee.
of course. You could go to Del Rio, Tennessee. They would welcome you. You can go to Morristown, Tennessee. They would welcome you.
Well, but I don't think I want to handle one myself.
You wouldn't have to, and they would not bring a serpent to you.
You know, I'm like you, Bill. I would like to go just to that because, not to mock these people because they probably have more faith than I do. I'd say they probably do. It's confusing to someone who doesn't pick up snakes, but, they have true faith, I believe.
Yeah, of course. And the proof of that is they handle serpents knowing that they can get bit and they can get maimed.
I didn't know.
But what most people don't realize is the majority of people in a serpent handling church don't handle serpents, right? If the Lord doesn't move upon you to do it, they would say, don't do it. The only thing is they would want you to respect the Gospel of Mark, and where it says in 16:18, they shall take up serpents, they say that's exactly what it means.
Okay, Ron, are you going to be in a parade tonight?
No, we have to be down in Hickson, Tennessee tonight.
Hickson?
Yes.
Well,
See you.
it was good talking to you and Deb, and I
righty.
listen to your show.
Thank you. Bye-bye. We had accepted an engagement down in Chattanooga before I realized it was Christmas parade night. We're going down over to Hickson to Green Park or something. It's one of the public parks there. They have a pavilion, an indoor pavilion, obviously. And it's the Chattanooga Hiking Club, and we're going to show them our Caney Creek documentary.
Oh, cool.
They'd all been up there hiking, and
They'll
now they want to
enjoy
see
that.
our documentary.
Yes,
Yeah,
that's great.
Well, let me ask you, when you talk about Mark, how does the religious world interpret Mark that, I'll just say a Baptist minister or a priest, or how do they interpret Mark, and what does it mean compared to the people who actually take it literally and handle snakes?
What's interesting about the Gospel of Mark is the Gospel of Mark at 16 verses 17, 18, and it says, "These signs shall follow them that believe." So many serpent handlers like to be called sign-following believers. And it says, "In my name they shall cast out devils, they shall speak with new tongues, they shall take up serpents. If they drink any deadly thing, it shall not harm them. They shall lay hands upon the sick, and they shall recover." So the early Pentecostals accepted the notion of speaking in tongues as the initial physical evidence of baptism with the Holy Spirit.
Good morning, you're live on Old Town Cleveland.
Hey, Ron,
Hey,
if you get in one of them churches, you know what's going to happen?
what's that?
That snake's going to run you out. You're so rotten.
If it come towards me, I would run out. Yes, I would admit.
Won't come towards you because it'll either be locked safely in a box or it'll be handled by a person who has victory over it.
And it's trying to get away from you, anyway. I mean, most snakes, you have to put your hand in their mouth to get them to bite you.
Well, that's not true. Snakes can bite.
Yeah,
but the deal is that it's less likely than people think, because think about being in the wilderness. The rattlesnake is giving you the noise to get you to go away, and he's not going to strike at you unless you continue to come towards him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Hey, Ron?
Yes.
You wouldn't have to worry about me because I wouldn't go in there.
Oh, I'd love to.
I would have to go one time at least here
You
sometime.
enjoy it. I'll take you one time.
All right.
Would love to go.
Hey, Debbie?
Yes, dear.
You go?
Pardon me? Oh, yeah, I'd go.
Go in there?
I'd go. Haven't been, but I'd go. Bye, my dear.
I would avoid place with hard work more than I would.
That's it.
We have people
Bye-bye.
people online here asking about how do they do anything to prepare the snakes before the handling, or is it just the snake in its natural? That's always a big
Yeah,
deal.
one of the strange claims about serpent handlers is they do something to serpents so that it's safe to handle them. So people have claimed that they freeze their serpents. People have claimed that they defang their serpents. People have claimed that they milk their serpents. But in fact, that's not true. I've documented just under 100 deaths from serpent bites. So the reality that a serpent can bite and kill you is obviously there. So the serpent handlers capture their serpents in the wild. They trade for them. As long as they're doing well in captivity, they handle them. And then if they're not doing well in captivity, they release them back into the wild. But there's no trick to handling. They handle simply as an act of obedience, as an act of faith, and then they're willing to accept whatever the consequences of that action is.
Now, when the pastor picks up a snake, I mean, he opens the box? Does he know how to reach in and grab the snake? I mean, he doesn't reach in and just grab it by its face there.
Not.
Well, actually, what one of the strangest things is, and at UTC we have over 200 DVDs documenting serpent handling for over 30 years. And the serpents are in a box, and what the person does who's going to take out that serpent is they just put their hand in and pull that serpent out. Whether from the back or the front, they don't know. It makes no difference. So the reality of it is that it's extremely risky to put your hand into a serpent box because the serpent can strike. But in fact, these people, and we can document, are able to do it most of the time without being bit, without getting maimed, or without dying.
When do they get bit the most?
My belief is that the probability of getting bit by a serpent is a function of the frequency with which you handle it. So when the early Church of God endorse the practice of taking up serpents. They did it because everybody thought it was a sign of the Holy Spirit giving them victory over the serpent, because people were not bit and they were not maimed. And the assumption was if you pick up a serpent, right, you will get bit or maimed. But as the church institutionalized the practice, as they did it more frequently, people began to get bit and people got maimed. So the Church of God of Prophecy backed off and no longer endorsed the practice. And the renegade churches all throughout Appalachia, often with the name Church of God in it, the Church of God in Jesus Christ's name, something like that.
Signs following, holiness.
Continued the practice. But what they had to do then is come to grips with the theology of what happens if you get bit. And they have an actually elegant, simple solution. They say, it says they shall take up serpents. It doesn't say they shall not get bit. And what they would say is nobody gets out of this life alive. So it's not a question of whether or not you're going to die. It's a question of how you die. And they say, what is a greater evidence of the assurance of your salvation if that in obedience to God you are handling a serpent and you are struck by that serpent and die? Your salvation is assured.
Mm-hmm. What about the fires and the poisons that were sometimes part of those ceremonies too?
Yeah, the interesting thing about Appalachian religion, it is always strongly associated with events that will elicit powerful experiences. So many Appalachian churches handle fire, for instance, but that fire is not considered to be a sign because it's not specifically mentioned in the Gospel of Mark. But they also do drink poison. But since the Gospel of Mark says if they drink any deadly thing, that means it's a conditional, it's not an imperative. So every serpent-handling church will have both serpents and poison. And everybody who drinks poison handles serpents. But not everybody who handles serpents drinks poison. And the poisons they have are poisons that are common in the Appalachian Mountain region. So they would have things like carbolic acid, strychnine, which they mix. I've seen people drink battery acid. But as a general rule, many more people handle serpents than drink poison.
Now, do the people who drink poison, do they die or always? Or
Yes, and I've documented 7 deaths from drinking poison. But from a purely scientific perspective, there's a difficulty. Because if you drink poison and you don't die, from a scientific perspective, it's a sublethal dosage. But the trouble is there's huge individual differences in tolerance for things like strychnine. So if you were in a church and you saw somebody drink strychnine and said, could I do it? The answer is, I don't know. Try it. But what isn't lethal for one person may be lethal for you.
Yes. Good morning, you're live on Old Town Cleveland.
Good morning, Ron.
Hey.
This is Brenda.
Hey, Brenda.
Hey, how y'all doing?
Good.
There was a program coming on for a while. I've not seen it in the last couple of weeks, but it had 2 different snake handling churches on it. It filmed their services and filmed them how they hunted for their snakes, and it showed them handling the snakes and drinking poison. It showed them using fire. One was in North Carolina and one was in Kentucky. And I watched it several times, and I wondered how that they, why they were on the TV showing where they were and all about the churches, because I know that it's illegal. But being raised in a holiness church, or not raised in a holiness, I went to Church of God of Prophecy, and then my husband was a pastor in a holiness church. I did know people who handled snakes, but this program showed everything about it. It showed how they got their snakes, and when they would bring them to the church, and where they get the snakes, and they were in boxes, and one of the pastors of the churches, it was an elderly man, it told how many times he had been bitten, and it physically showed him on one of the programs get bit.
Yes, the program you're talking about was called Snake Salvation, and it was produced by the National Geographic Television Network, and I consulted for that program. And what they wanted to do was to develop a reality show so that they could document for the public the nature of this tradition. And actually, it wasn't in North Carolina. The two churches you're talking about is Jimmy Coots's church in Middlesboro, Kentucky, and then Andrew Hamlin's church in La Follette, Tennessee. And there are a total of 16 segments to that. And it's an effort to produce a public documentary so that people could see and understand this tradition.
Yes, I remember those names, and you're right. Yes, you're right. That's what I was watching, and I was very interested, and I would love to go and be in a snake handling church.
They would love to have you come, and if you're familiar with the Church of God of Prophecy, the Church of God of Prophecy, all the way through the 1940s, endorsed the practice of handling serpents.
Brenda, you worked as an evangelist for a while, didn't you?
Yeah, in the Holiness Church, which is the Church of Jesus Christ.
Sure, and these people also would identify as holiness people. So the three strands that define this tradition are the holiness tradition, the Pentecostal tradition, and to some extent the fundamentalist tradition. So they're a mixture of these three traditions. But most serpent handlers, if they're not wanting to be called sign-following believers, are willing to be called holiness people.
Yes. My whole family was raised in the Church of God of Prophecy, and my grandmother was married to a retired minister. He'd worked in the church for 40 years.
Oh, that's great. The book I wrote on Them That Believe, my co-author is W. Paul Williamson, and he was, for most of his life, an ordained minister in the Church of God of Prophecy.
Well, the show was very, very interesting that I was talking about, and I watched it. I would forget what channel it was on, and then I'd just come up on it because
there's just too many channels now, aren't there, Brenda?
But they'll probably show it many times because it's one of those National Geographic specials.
Well, I will probably stop and watch it to know that you helped with it. You know, sometimes I kind of worry about those kinds of shows that if people are forcing themselves to do something for the camera.
There is a danger, and one of the arguments that the tradition makes is most churches will not allow cameras in the church, precisely because they don't want people to think they're handling serpents as a publicity stunt or as a show for the camera. But Jamie Coots and Andrew Hamlin agreed to allow the National Geographic in, and National Geographic did a fairly good job in representing the range of beliefs and behaviors that are associated with these people.
What was interesting too is the older man that got bit and that they filmed him. They set up with him all night. He of course, he was sick.
And that was actually Jamie Coots's father. Yes. And his father was bit to show you the reality of handling that they never know if they will get bit. And as typically the case in the holiness tradition, when someone is bit, they do not seek medical aid, but instead the church simply sustains them and prays that God's will be done. And Jamie Coots's father survived that bite.
Yes, he did. It was very interesting. I really enjoyed the program, and the younger minister, the story of his life, and that he had planned to commit suicide. And that they really laid it all out. They didn't hold anything back, and it was very, very interesting. And of course, he didn't. And then he continued on and is still preaching, and thank God for that. And it was just very interesting. I really enjoyed it.
I think the value of the show is, again, part of what I try to do is give people some factual understanding of this tradition.
Yes.
And even if you don't agree with the belief and practice of the tradition, I think what the show did was show you the sincerity of the faith of those who do this.
Yes, and it takes a lot of faith. It does. And I participated in a lot of church services where we had healing lines, and I have seen miraculous healings. I've been healed myself, and of course that takes a lot of faith also.
Sure, and one of the signs in the Gospel of Mark is they shall lay hands upon the sick, and they shall recover. So every Serpent-Handle church practices the laying on of hands for healing.
Right. Well, I'm really enjoying the show, and I'm going to get off here and let y'all continue. But this is very interesting.
Thank you, Miss Brenda.
Okay.
I always love talking to you.
You're listening to Whoop FM 99.9, or you can go to the internet at www.whoopfm.com. You can call us here at 614-5553. We got Dr. Ralph Hood from UTC here, and we're talking about snake handling, serpent handling, Appalachians. So if you have any question, please call us here at 614-5553. Speaking of serpent handling, there's a man named George Went Hensley who has an interesting background before he got to this area. I think he had been a moonshiner, and maybe he'd went to jail and escaped.
That was just cash crops.
And but he came here, and A.J. Thomason, which if you're from here in Cleveland, you will probably know that the Thomason family is the one that started the Church of God, which later became the Church of God of Prophecy after the court ordered it to be named the Church of God of Prophecy. But he was one who actually appointed George Wynn Hensley as, if I'm telling the story correct, you're the expert, as the first pastor of a serpent handling church.
Yeah, George Hensley is an interesting figure because he's kind of like the St. Paul of serpent handling. And what happens is he's the first one to have gained notoriety and publicity for the handling of serpents. And as he told the story to the Chattanooga papers, he was out here on White Oak Mountain, and he was struggling with his faith, and he was reading his Bible, open to the Gospel of Mark, and he saw a rattlesnake. And he simply, with trepidation and some degree of fear, walked over to that serpent and picked it up, just as the Gospel of Mark said he could. And he was amazed. And he went back to his church and began to preach that God had given people the power to handle serpents. And the way the tradition actually started was that scoffers would come to these churches of God, and particularly to Hensley's church, and they would bring serpents in milk cans and gunny sacks and throw them down and challenge the believers to pick them up. And when the believers felt the anointing, they did in fact pick them up. And that publicity went throughout the United States and helped funnel the interest in the Church of God and later the Church of God of Prophecy, because not only were they speaking in tongues, which many mainstream churches found very strange, but they also were demonstrating the power to handle serpents.
Very
Go
interesting.
ahead, caller. You're live on Old Town Cleveland.
Good morning.
I think we lost that one.
I just wanted to mention, before we get started here again, there's an open house today down at the Creative Arts Guild, and you can buy a lot of good things down there. They're at the corner of 3rd and Inman Street.
Including your book.
Including my books. That's a really good place to pick up my books for Christmas presents.
Great.
And they'd be glad to see you, and they probably have some refreshments and some really nice local crafts there. And it's at the Creative Arts Guild that's located in the very corner building at 3rd and Inman Street at the underpass.
Dr. Hood, you said that the notoriety of snake handling basically come out of this area here. You know, if you've ever been on White Oak Mountain, some of the biggest rattlesnakes in the country along that mountain up through there. There's some big rattlesnakes up there. So, but was there snake handling before George Wynn Hensley, or did he create? I mean, some people said that it's created here. Well, maybe not created here, but even I think in earlier days from the Bible there was probably some serpent handling, right?
Yeah, one of my arguments is that clearly the serpent handlers believe that the Christians have always handled serpents. For instance, they quote the last verse in the Gospel of Mark, where it says, "And they went forth and preached everywhere, the Lord working with them, confirming the word with signs following." So it leads the handlers to argue that Jesus and the early apostles handled serpents. It's clear that George Hensley was the one who popularized the activity in the early 1900s because the press followed him. And wherever Hensley went, other churches began to take up serpents and follow the practice. But it's probably the case, too, that the practice emerged independently in many places. For instance, independently in Alabama, probably with Bishop reading the Gospel of Mark. And Jimmy Morrill, who's a good serpent handler, a pastor of a church in Del Rio, Tennessee, believes that in the 17 and 1800s in the Appalachian region, people were handling serpents. But the only difference is there was no publicity.
Did the holiness churches, there was never an organization of holiness churches, like there's not a Southern Baptist Convention.
What's interesting, again, especially the holiness churches in the Appalachian region, they resist any kind of centralized authority. And what identifies holiness people in the Appalachian Mountain region is really not so much their beliefs in getting into the theology of Wesleyan Methodism, but really a psychological statement, which is holiness people believe that their life should be lived as an outward manifestation of an inward spiritual transformation. So holiness people would think it curious if you had to ask them what their religion was. You should see their religion in their life form and their practices. And since the holiness people believe that the behavior follows from the belief, that's why the laws against serpent handling are so offensive to them. Because what the states are saying is you have the right to believe something, but you don't have the right to practice something. And the holiness reply is, if we don't practice what we believe, then we don't have the belief.
It's almost like it's okay to have a fifth of whiskey as long as you don't drink it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the holiness people, despite the laws against serpent handling, it simply drives it underground and it continues. So the laws have not been able to stop the handling of serpents, and my guess is they never will.
Good morning. You're live on Old Town Cleveland.
Ron?
Yeah.
When I was growing up down here in Ooltewah,
turn your radio down.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
Go ahead there.
I didn't mean to be bossy, but turn your radio down, please.
There you go.
Anyway, when I was growing up over around Birchwood, there were several of the churches over around Birchwood.
Sure. And Dolly Pond, that was a very famous church and gained tremendous publicity in the 1940s because of a death that occurred at Dolly Pond.
Right. But, they go up there on the mountain up there and catch their snakes and bring them in down there. And I went to a singing over there one time when I was just a kid. And, of course, I wouldn't go in the church house. I was scared to death. But those people in there, they were handling some rattlesnakes as big around as your arm. And, they just reach down there. When they get in the spirit, they just reach down there and get a hold of one.
You're exactly right. And what you realize from what you're saying is that, in fact, people can handle serpents much of the time, indeed most of the time, without getting bit or without getting maimed.
Yeah. Well, it's just like it goes back again to the people that are that handle those cobra snakes over in India. It's sort of a charming thing. They keep them occupied, and then they get a hold of them. And after you get a hold of one of them, you can pretty much do whatever you want to do with him. But
well, what's interesting about the serpent handling tradition, though, is while there are many religious traditions in other cultures that handle serpents. Only in America are serpents handled as a direct mandate from a sacred text. So the reason that the cobra is less interesting to me is cobras are relatively slow, and it comes out of a cultural tradition.
Right.
But the serpent handling tradition in America comes directly out of the Bible and the Gospel of Mark.
Yeah. Okay, guys. Enjoying the show.
Hey,
Thank
there's
you for
some big,
listening.
There's some big rattlesnakes down that mountain, aren't there?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, down, you know, I was born right at the foot of White Oak Mountain and used to go up I'd go up there and play up there on the mountain where the old Lauderback Hotel was.
Yeah.
And I've seen rattlesnakes up there, not exaggerating now, 4 to 5 feet long, big around as your arm.
There's no doubt. I've seen people handle serpents that size.
I've got a story about one, but I can't tell it on TV. I mean, on the radio.
Thanks for calling.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
I just love our callers.
Does you know, talking about those families at Dolly Pond and of course come into Cleveland, the Ford family had not far from here had a church.
Yes.
But you know, there's a lot of members of the Ford family and the Harden family and George Went Hensley family is still around. You know, some now grandchildren things, and you know, Minnie Sue Harden just died like 2-3 years ago and lived here in Cleveland and had been a member of a church. And a lot of people didn't realize there was a real popular picture of her when she was 18, 19 years old with a snake wrapped around her head, I believe it was.
I think it's a Chattanooga Times or Free Press picture.
Yeah,
it is a picture, and it was used as in Weston's LeBar's book called They Shall Take Up Serpents, and it's probably one of the most widely publicized photographs of a handler.
And she died, like I say, just here in Cleveland 2 or 3 months ago, and I didn't realize it when I seen the obituary who it was until we actually ran into her grandson, and he told me who it was. And then we went over to find out where the Dolly Pond Church was, and it's not easy to find because the church is no longer there. But there's a graveyard, and it's not in great shape, but it's on the side of a little hill.
Right.
It's okay.
And Minnie Sue had been buried there, so
Yes,
it's the last grave has been put in there. So pretty interesting to know that those families are still. And how many of those families have talked to you? I know that, or you have talked to them most likely.
Yeah, quite a few, and I try to get as many stories as I can from the serpent handling families. And for instance, I went to the Dolly Pond Church when it was still there, but the Church of God of Prophecy was adamant in trying to minimize the role that this practice had played in their tradition, that they actually decided to tear down the church, despite the fact that it's one of the significant historical churches.
And there's not a historical marker there yet either.
Not at all.
Yeah, I get sad about that. Good morning, you're live on Old Town Cleveland.
Good morning, Ron. I wanted to ask that guy a question.
Go ahead, Red.
Have you ever been to a church where they pray evil spirits out of people?
Sure, they do it in serpent handling churches because one of the signs of the Gospel of Mark's is in my name they shall cast out devils.
Have you ever seen a devil come out?
Yes, I have seen people in Sand Mountain have devils cast out of them. It's a regular practice.
I really don't believe in that.
Well, it depends on what you say when you say you don't believe. The phenomena of exorcism, for instance, casting out demons, occurs in many religious traditions. Now, it may be an interpretation that somebody won't accept, but the fact that you can engage in this practice and radically alter people's behavior is true. Now, whether you attribute it to an actual devil or demon coming out of the person is a different thing.
But I've heard people say they saw this, they saw this. I never saw nothing.
Yeah. Well, maybe I should rephrase what I said. Have I ever seen a devil come out? No. Have I seen people exorcised and radically alter their behaviors? Yes.
Well, now that might be okay, but when they say they see the spirits coming, I don't believe that.
Yeah. Well, I know, but the only problem we have is like when somebody says they're possessed by the Holy Ghost. If you don't share in that experience, then what the person says for you can only be a hypothesis. Right. So there's no doubt that there are people who believe they hear the voice of God, people who believe they have seen devils cast out. And if we don't hear the voice of God, and if we don't see it, then we're just simply caught with accepting their statements as to how they experience the world.
Right. But on the snake thing,
Yes, Red.
I think there's still snake handlers in Georgia.
Oh, there
yeah.
are. The largest church until recently handling serpents since 1970s was in Kingston, Georgia, Carl Porter's church. And the only reason it's not going strong right now is Carl Porter died of a natural death, and the people no longer continue the practice in his church.
Well, if I ever go to one in Ron's there, when they hand me a snake, I'm going to hand it to Ron.
Yeah, I'll be outside waiting on you.
Well, they won't hand you a snake if you don't reach out your hand to receive it. I guarantee you.
Keep your hands in your pockets,
Well,
Red.
there's something, you've never seen a devil cast out, and you've never seen Georgia win a football game either, have you?
Oh, yeah. Football games. Now, come on, Ron.
I know.
Thanks,
I just had to
Red.
get you buzzed. Have you ever seen the law come after you when you're making moonshine?
Yes.
Okay, I thought so.
And I've heard them blow my steel up.
I bet.
All right, Red, we'll see you later.
All right, bye.
Hey, we got to take a break. We'll be back here in just a minute with more Old Town Cleveland. Don't go away, folks.
WOOP, LP, Cleveland, Tennessee.
You need money overnight? Check into cash. Your time is tight. .com. Bank account's too low? Check into cash. So where do you go? .com. Do it online in a record time. It's the easy way to get money next day. Do a quick click from home at checkintocash.com. Just stay in the house, check into cash, and grab your mouse.com. Get your money online, check into cash, right on time.com. You can be sure it's secure from our bank straight to yours. Do a quick click from home at checkintocash.com. No time to get away, check into cash. You gotta stay home.com. Hey, that's okay, check into cash. You can do it alone.com. Any old time, do it online. Just stay in the house and grab your mouse. Do a quick click from home. Get your money overnight at the right website. Do a quick click from home. Go to checkintocash.com.
Wheeler Technologies has moved. Visit them at their new location at 490 Grove Avenue Southwest next to Bradley Rentals. Same great folks, same great service with a better location to serve you. Call Wheeler Technologies for voice, data, and security needs at 664-TECH. That's 664-8324. And remember, depend on Wheeler Technologies for the current time and temperature every day at 476-1111. Tennessee Alarm Contractor C1750.
You may know Mermaid Mattress has won the Reader's Choice Survey taken by the Cleveland Daily Banner, voting Mermaid the #1 place to buy a mattress in Cleveland. But did you know they've also won every year they've voted in Dalton by the readers of the Dalton Daily Citizen? And every year they have taken the North Georgia Chattanooga Times Free Press Best of the Best Survey. And now for the 12th time for the Times Free Press Best of the Best Survey in Chattanooga. Roger wants to say thanks to all the area voters in each and every survey in the area for making Mermaid Mattress the #1 place to make your next mattress purchase. Mermaid Mattress, Georgetown Road, Cleveland. Call 472-2486.
Mermaid Mattress Factory and Showroom.
Kiesler Incorporated is in the business of recycling your metal, and they pay cash. The only covered scrapyard around where you can recycle rain or shine. They're located off the bypass on Overhead Bridge Road. Automobiles, appliances, copper, stainless steel, tin, all metals can be recycled at Kiesler, and you can walk away with cash. That's right, they pay cash, and they are the friendliest scrapyard in the Southeast. If you have unwanted metal just laying around, bring it to Kiesler Recycling today and walk away with cash. Kiesler Recycling open Monday through Saturday, 7:30 to 5, or call for more details, 614-3000. All things NASCAR, Whoop on Wheels with Fast Eddie every Tuesday night right here on 99.9 Whoop FM.
Shopping mall. Ooh, where'd the
Welcome back to Old Town Cleveland. You can call us here at 614-5553. We got Dr. Ralph Hood from UTC here talking about the Appalachia and also snake handling or serpent. And we have a caller. Go ahead there, caller.
Good morning.
Yes, good morning. Good morning. Dr. Hood, have you ever heard of any evidence of the snakes being anesthetized or medicated or, in any way to where they're not as agitated as a normal, a venomous viper would be? Have you ever run across anything like that?
I've run across that charge, and part of what I've done in over 30 years of studying these people is to try to see if there's any evidence that's true. And the bottom line is it's not true. They don't do anything to their serpents. They catch their serpents in the wild, and they're not anesthetized, they're not defanged, they're not milked. And the proof of that is, as I mentioned earlier, I've just documented under 100 deaths from serpent bites, and many more people maimed from serpent bites. So the argument that there must be a trick because you can't handle serpents is simply fallacious. It's just not true. And keep in mind, most of the serpent handling churches that are throughout the Appalachian Mountain regions never allow cameras, never allow videotapes, so they are simply engaged in a religious ritual that they believe comes out of the Gospel of Mark, and are not doing it for any kind of show or any kind of grandstanding. And many of the documentaries that have been produced on serpent handlers have actually been able to document a bite or a death.
Go ahead, John.
Did you see the 60 Minutes episode at Hot Springs?
No, at Hot Springs? Are you talking about Hot Springs, Arkansas?
No, Hot Springs, North Carolina, or Del Rio, Tennessee. 60 Minutes did a segment on a church up there. It's probably on YouTube.
Yeah, it would be Jimmy Morrill's church in Del Rio, Tennessee, and I've been there many, many times. And I actually edited a book of Jimmy Morrill's oral history of his own Jesus name handling tradition. So I know that church very well, and I know Jimmy Morrill very well.
Beautiful area up there, and I used to belong to a Whitewater Canoe Club.
Okay.
We ran whitewater rivers all over the southeast, and one of our favorite rivers was the French Broad.
Oh yes, yep.
And so we would go up. I lived in Knoxville at the time, and we would go up to the French Broad, and there was a couple of local fellas up there that would run shuttle for you. You remember, like the movie Deliverance?
Oh, exactly.
The local guys ran the shuttle. Well, I still remember their names. One of them, his name was Americus, and the other one was Alonzo.
Well, I hope you had better luck than Deliverance did.
Yeah, and they lived in Hot Springs, North Carolina.
Okay.
Just up the road from Del Rio.
Yeah, I know where that is, and actually right between Hot Springs, there's Del Rio, and then right there in North Carolina is Brown's Church, which is about 30 miles from Hot Springs. But the Brown's Church has never allowed any cameras at all in it, although the Del Rio Church has in the past allowed cameras, but no longer does.
We were in the early 1980s. 60 Minutes had just done a segment on one of those churches, and I didn't really pay much attention to it, but we were running the shuttle, and we actually parked by the church, and I asked Alonzo and Americus, I said, isn't that the church that was on 60 Minutes? And they said, it sure was. It was just a few weeks before we were up there for our whitewater canoe trip, and and they both broke out laughing, and they said, that's the craziest thing. He says, they put those snakes in the refrigerator.
That's simply not true.
So he got a snake that's half frozen, and But
if you've ever seen a documentary, you can tell the serpents are healthy, and they're certainly not frozen. And Jimmy Morrill is world renowned for his ability to hunt copperheads, and his church is almost always handling freshly caught copperhead serpents.
Well, there's probably copperheads all. Anybody should get on US 70 at Newport.
That's it.
That Hot Springs is such a beautiful, beautiful little town.
Oh yeah, it's a neat place to go. And I usually, when I'm going to the homecoming in Marshall, I always stop at Hot Springs and have a good breakfast.
Just spend a few hours in Hot Springs and have lunch. It would remind everybody around here of the Hiwassee Reliance on steroids.
There you go.
Everything is magnified by 10.
I would agree with that.
Yeah, I'm enjoying the show.
Thank you. Bye-bye. So you have these 30 years worth of videos. What will become of those? I mean, do you have to agree not to show them now, or
what I've done, and I'm really actually kind of proud of this, is we have a archive at the Lupton Library, and what I've done is all of these DVDs and videos from way back are unedited and available for anybody to do research with two exceptions. They're all copyright, so you can't go in there and take a clip out, put it on TV. But if you wanted to know what a serpent handling church was, for instance, there's tons of films of Del Rio, Tennessee, the entire service. There's no editing. I guess the only editing that's done is you point the camera. But I'll just put the camera in the back of the church, let it run, and whatever happens. I also have interviews with serpent handlers. What's it like? How do you feel when you're anointed? I have interviews with serpent handlers who are dying from bites, and what they are experiencing, what they think. So it's the most complete set of documentation of the serpent hunting tradition, and anybody's welcome to come to the library, do
That's
research.
At UTC's library.
Yeah, Lupton Library.
That's amazing. And so how long did it take you to develop the relationship that they'd let you bring cameras in?
Took a long time. Because the churches, when I was beginning, were more and more suspicious of outsiders. And the reason is people come in and try to sensationalize it, try to only show serpent handling. So I went around with these people, I attended their churches, I went to the homecomings with them, and then they began to let me into the churches with cameras, because they knew that I was going to document it. All of the major preachers I have interviewed about their churches, about their belief. I have videos of their sermons, so that it's a nice reciprocal trust, that I protect them by not allowing people to use these videos in an inappropriate way. And yet these people now can speak for themselves to outsiders if they will simply come to the archive.
Interesting, very interesting.
George Wynn Hensley is an interesting character going back through there, and I know he was. There was a big trial down in Chattanooga at one time, and he was outside preaching outside. What was that trial about? He
was arrested, and what they got him under, and they still do, is disturbing the peace. And he was found guilty. He refused to pay the fine. He was then spent a short time in jail. Somebody paid the fine, and he was released. And so wherever Hensley would go, he would preach and get a large following. And that's why the Chattanooga press is so important, because it followed Hensley until 1955, when he was preaching a revival in Florida and got bit probably for the 30th time, and that bite proved to be fatal, and he died.
Mm-hmm. Now, he, like I say, I believe he escaped from jail. Is that true? And then he come to Tennessee, I guess, to keep away from going back to jail, and married a couple of times and had some bouts with alcoholism.
Hensley was evidently a very colorful figure, had strange kind of character issues, and so probably gained notoriety partly because of his rambunctious lifestyle, booze. I believe he was married 3, maybe 4 times, which is not acceptable to the tradition. But he still had this powerful charismatic presence. And wherever he went to preach, you could anticipate that there would be a new church emerging that would, for at least a time, handle serpents. So he was the one that was kind of the Pied Piper of serpent handling.
You know, and like I say, there was no real. He never was the leader of the Holiness Church. He was just did it, right? I mean, because they didn't have an organized.
There is no such thing as a leader, and just like I said, the serpent handling churches have no centralized authority. Now, he was licensed to preach in the Church of God, but then he turned that license in and then became an independent
They
preacher.
sort of requested he turn it in,
Yes.
didn't he? I didn't know if he turned it in or they took it away. I don't know which one
Well,
it was.
it was one of those, you can either
Mutual,
get fired or resign.
But
the Church of God of Prophecy by then was trying to back away from the practice. And the reason they were backing away from the practice is they did not want to endorse a practice that could maim or kill. So one of my arguments is it's one of the interesting bias against Appalachian Mountain religion. Because when the courts rule they have a compelling interest, the state of Tennessee, in the Carson Springs case, said we are going to protect people from being widows and orphans and not allow people to engage in high-risk activity. But I've testified in court cases saying that's a fallacious argument because we allow high-risk activity in all kinds of secular activities. So the man that just called in Whitewaters, well, there's risk taking a canoe or a kayak down the Broad River. And people ride motorcycles. The injury rate in professional football is now officially 100%. If you play, you will get hurt. So my argument is if you allow consenting adults to engage in secular high-risk activities, how can you prohibit consenting adults engaging in a high-risk activity when they do it on the basis of their faith?
Let's get this call here. Good morning, live on Old Town Cleveland.
Ron?
Yeah.
Do you know if the Christmas parade's been canceled or not here?
We do not know.
No word that it has been.
No word that it has.
I haven't heard it either. They've been several calling and asking if I knew about it.
I think the Christmas parade is a go. It usually goes no matter what.
Yeah, okay. Well, thanks, Debbie.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
I want to ask about, it might be changing the subject just a little bit. Tell me about the music. When you got to the Appalachian area from California, what did you think about the music that was being played here?
When I first came, it's amazing. And part of what I've tried to do is on these DVDs is have this music that comes out of the Appalachian Mountains. And particularly try to get the music from the old timers because they developed their music without any influence from television and hardly any influence from radio. So it's a unique Appalachian music. But now it's been modified because people have been exposed to television, to radio, now to the internet. So you can see that the influence of secular music has crept in, but still it's the case that in the churches they only play their religious music, and many of the Appalachian musicians will only play religious music, will not play rock and roll or any of that kind of music, even though you can tell that they have been influenced by it.
What kind of musics do you see in the church? I mean, is it just acoustical or do they do the shape note stuff? What do they do?
The old timers did shape note, but now it's acoustical, and now you'll find electric guitars, electric organs. So it's updated because that technology has creeped in, and these Appalachian handlers are influenced by the technology. So, for instance, all of the young Appalachians have cell phones. Andrew Hamlin, who's the person that one of the documentaries is about, regularly puts his material on Facebook. So you have this interesting phenomena that's quite common in fundamentalist religious traditions. They use modern technology to promote old-time religion.
And what was his name?
Andrew Hamlin.
Now, in talking, it's interesting thing that talking about Hensley. Sort of could lead people into and just always interesting. Like Jim Jones in Guyana, he led people to drink poison and die. I mean, is there those certain leaders that can do that kind of stuff, or is religion the hook, or what happens there?
Yeah, well, I want to be careful. I don't want to compare Hensley to Jim Jones, but I understand. I understand the sense of your question, and I think the answer is yes. I think there's one thing think of the difference between the fundamentalist movement and the Pentecostal movement. Both accepted that you should guide your life by the plain meaning of Scripture when it's available, but fundamentalists get into this kind of textual argument to persuade you that this is right, this is wrong. And the Pentecostals rely more upon emotion, upon feeling. So the Pentecostal, what rises to the forefront of their tradition, are people who are terribly persuasive at getting you emotionally invested in the faith. And they believe that is possession of the Holy Spirit. So the charisma of the preacher is not in the fact that he's academic or that he's, just verbally persuasive, but it's in a total kind of charismatic presence. And take an example that might be better. The power when he burst on the scene of somebody like Elvis Presley, coming out of the great gospel tradition, but having just whatever that it is, such that he became amazingly influential, even in Southern culture, and brought to Southern culture a lot of the characteristics that were associated with gospel music, and particularly gospel music in the black church. And he brought it to the broader population of the South. And so he had that charisma. And I think in the serpent hunting tradition, the preachers that rise to the forefront are preachers who have that charisma.
It is. Where does that charisma come from? I mean, there are certain people walk into a room and the room lights up. I mean, is it just a God-given or?
Yeah, I think the thing.
It's just something that happens.
Yeah, the thing that psychologists have studied for years, nobody knows how to pinpoint what it is, but everybody knows when to see it. Two people can give the same sermon, and you go, number one's got it, number two doesn't. And in the serpent hunting tradition, what's really interesting is I'll often say, if somebody's up there, not only do you have the word, but can you preach the word? And if not, sit down. Because the power of the tradition is built upon the ability of the preacher to get an audience. And the preacher gets an audience because of his ability to preach.
Dr. Hood, when you first came to this area, were you still seeing a lot of street preachers?
Oh, there were a tremendous number of street preachers and a tremendous number of tent revivals. Mm-hmm. So all over the Appalachian Mountain, there would be large revivals with lasting 2 or 3 days, maybe a week, with traveling evangelists and handling of serpents. But that is less and less common now, and more the serpent handling tradition is, if there are revivals, they move from church to church.
Instead of
I hate to say about religion, but maybe some commercialism and money involved now, don't you think?
Well, sure. And one of the arguments that I've made, one of the reasons the serpent handling tradition has been so hit upon by the law is it doesn't do anything that produces a profit, that produces commodities that could sell. So if you ask me, football may have 100% injury rate, but think of the revenue it produces. Or think if you talk about Georgia football, well, my father comes from Alabama. And the line in Alabama, they say, in Alabama, football's not a religion. It's more important than that. Mm-hmm. And so you get this notion that the amount of money that schools make off of football is immense. So even though people get maimed and hurt, right, they don't ban it. But serpent handlers, there's no money to make. And so I think that the serpent handlers are under the radar that way. And the ones that are taking over are like mega churches, televangelists, who, whatever you think about them personally, nevertheless generate tremendous revenue, tremendous profits. The religious publication book market is huge, and so there is a huge market to be made by selling religion. And one of the things that the serpent handling churches insist upon is you cannot sell the gospel. And so what that means is they, in the past, would not accept money for anything they did because the gospel is preached and free to everyone.
Andrew Hamblin, I just looked at him on Facebook. He's the tremendously young fella. How old is he?
He is 22, and what's interesting about Hamblin is he represents the exception to the rule, and that is he was not raised in a serpent handling tradition. He, in fact, saw serpent handling on TV and then went to Jamie Coots's church in Middlesboro to see it for himself, got converted, and then founded his own church right up here in La Follette, Tennessee. And what makes him interesting is he's a perfect example of charisma. He was charged with possession of serpents, and at his hearing, he had 100 people had come wearing red to protest his being charged. When he came to the courtroom, they stood up and applauded. So the judge had to say, order in the court. We'll have order in the court. And he is an amazingly charismatic person. And what he's doing is getting many other young people into this tradition who knew nothing about it. So there's an example, again, of this charisma in action. And everybody who sees Andrew, even people who do not like him, recognizes that he has this tremendous charismatic presence.
How does, doing religious studies, I always find it interesting that if you go from the Church of Christ to Church of God to the Church of God of Prophecy to Baptist and that they all interpret the Bible the same but differently. The Church of Christ doesn't use musical instruments.
Right.
And where does all this, and some people say that most wars, or all wars, have been fought over religion. So, how do you interpret the Bible the same but differently?
Yeah, it's interesting that even if you accept the Bible as the infallible Word of God, let's say like a fundamentalist might, the problem is it's filtered through fallible minds. So I like to say, whenever you get two Baptists together, you get three opinions, right? And everybody can.
And you can say that about Methodists and the Church of God.
Methodist, and don't call in if you're a Baptist,
yes.
Right? In any group, and everybody knows that one of the things you don't want to do is argue religion, because you're not going to persuade the other person, because they'll pull something out from the text and interpret it a particular way, and you won't. So take an example, even within the Pentecostal tradition, the majority of the emerging Pentecostal denominations never accepted serpent handling. They said, it says they shall take up serpents, but for instance, the Pentecostal churches that rejected it said, but that refers to Paul, and St. Paul, when he accidentally was gathering sticks and got a serpent. So it says, if you accidentally pick up a serpent, then you'll be fine. But it doesn't mean you should deliberately go and, in their view, tempt the Lord and go pick up a serpent. But A.J. Tomlinson had a good response to that, because he said, if it means they shall accidentally pick up serpents and be okay, does it mean they shall accidentally lay hands upon the sick? Shall they accidentally cast out demons? So A.J. Tomlinson says, if you take the plain meaning of Scripture, then they shall take up serpents. But again, other groups have rejected it. The vast majority of the non-Pentecostals do not accept speaking in tongues. They believe that was the day of Pentecost, not for contemporary times. So you can have one text, but it's filtered through many, many different interpretations.
Mm-hmm. I have a couple questions outside of religion for you here. I am interested in foxfire and ginseng.
Yeah.
Have you ever actually seen foxfire?
Yes.
Yes. Explain to everyone what that is.
Well, if you're talking about let me talk about it, I can know directly about. One of the most famous serpent handling preachers that came out of the Morristown Church and then eventually was powerful in Middlesboro has an online site now where he sells ginseng and hunts it throughout the mountains and is able to sell it and make his total living now.
Cash crops, yeah.
Off ginseng. And again, it's part of the Appalachian tradition that they would think that is absurd that anybody could regulate something like that. They go out in the mountains, they hunt, they know how to get ginseng, they put it on the internet, and they sell it. And again, part of the beauty of this Appalachian mountain tradition is the resistance against this increased notion of regulation and having rules and procedures. And they would think that God puts the ginseng there, you learn to harvest it, it's your right.
Mm-hmm. No. It's just a root, right?
Yes.
I mean, and I don't know what a ginseng plant looks like.
I went with my dad before, and when he had gotten it, of course, I wasn't smart enough to be paying attention then, but I don't really, I mean, he took it to people at work kind of thing. What about foxfire?
I don't know as much about that, so I don't.
So it's a material that's composting that gives off a glow, which is not actually a fire, but you can see it in the woods at night.
Those are steels.
Yeah.
Well, I can tell you about steels. I know about that.
But I've always been curious about foxfire because I've always heard and read about it, but being in the mountains and in the country as much as I have been, I have never seen it. But when I went to Ireland, you could actually see grass and twigs and things move from the earth giving off the gases from all that decomposing material. And so I know where the legends of the little people came from, because you would really think that there was something moving there, but it's just the vegetation
and if
moving.
you compost anything and leave it, right, then it can generate heat and eventually spontaneously combust.
Very interesting.
So you come from California. What was the first shocking thing you found in Tennessee or in this area?
Grits?
No. Well, grits are interesting because grits is the only food that never makes it anywhere else, right? That is so amazing. Every other food is everywhere. But I guarantee you go to California, if you say grits, they'll just go, huh?
They don't have sweet tea out there either.
Well, no, not real sweet tea. But what first I liked about the South, because I had so many stereotypes about it, is I liked the intensity and passion of the people. And I think Ezekiel Mencken once said that he loved the South. He even loved its hate. Because I think what's good about the South is that when somebody talks to you, if they're really old-time Southerner, you don't have to figure what they really think. They'll just tell you, right? I remember one time riding a motor scooter, and this old lady just came to me and she said, "Dr. Hood, you're just a fool." Right? She said, "Why are you riding that little thing around town?" So I think there is this passion and intensity, and I think that's what also attracted me to the serpent handlers, because this notion that they're out for publicity or out for show or out for isn't true. And I'm still awed after all these years when I see somebody who's witnessed somebody killed, witnessed somebody maimed, nevertheless feel anointed, go into that box and pick up a serpent, right? And when they get done and they put that serpent back, they always thank God for having victory over it. And I think there's an authenticity and a passion there that some people are actually willing to risk their life for their faith. And Barb Elkins, who was one of the great matriarchs of the Jolo clan, said, "Here's the difference between most people's religion and mine." She says, "You tell people the difference is that when you go to church, when I go to church, I don't know if I'm coming out alive."
I think the thing in the South, we think that it's okay to say anything on our mind as long as we say "bless her heart" before we say it.
Folks,
that may be true.
Folks, you're listening to Old Town Cleveland here on Whoop FM 99.9, or you can go to the internet at www.whoopfm.com. You can call us here at 614-5553. We got Dr. Ralph Hood from UTC here. We've been talking about the Appalachian area, and we've been talking about snake handling churches, and I'm going to ask you a question about moonshine now. Had you ever drank any moonshine before you got here?
Not before I got here, but I have since I've been here.
That'll put a burn on you, won't it?
Well, that last guy I said, "Yeah, I had some yesterday." Good morning. You're live on Old Town Cleveland.
This is Sue Cottrell.
Hey, Sue.
I'm kind of responding to what you're calling foxfire.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, I'm the one that called in and told you when I was 4-year-old about them handling snakes on the courthouse square.
Oh, yeah, I've heard about that.
My dad was a moonshiner. And, but it was before I was born, but I heard about it. And I've seen them handling snakes. I haven't ever been in a church where they did. But the foxfire thing, my dad used to tell a story about when he was a child about a wagon wheel going through a puddle, and something stuck to the wagon wheel, and it lit up, and apparently it flew off of it and got out in front of the horses, and it scared them horses to death.
Wow.
But anyway, I was on the backside of Parksville Lake. It was in the summertime. I'd been camping out, and everyone had left and went into town, and I was out there by myself, and I was sitting there digging in the ashes, and something stuck to my stick, and it glowed. And it was almost like I had run across a piece of chewing gum or something that was in the ashes. But I sat there and I played with that for a long, long time, and it kept on glowing until it was totally all gone. But when I talked to a geologist about it, he said that it was some probably phosphorus. And so I'm just sort of wondering if maybe that's what foxfire in our area is, what they're...
I have no idea. It's always been a curiosity to me. Now, Miss Sue, did you grow up around Dolly Pond?
No, honey. I grew up here in Mouse Creek Valley.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. And like I said, my dad was born in 1890. And he had a lot of the old ways that you've been discussing, and so I've been familiar with a little bit of it and found it very interesting. And of course, my folks never handled snakes or anything like that, but I was aware of it. And my dad used to collect. He could identify ginseng and could dig it right here in Bradley County. So you've touched on my childhood memories of my father quite a bit.
I've seen a few, my family members would call it shaking their hair down, when the women would get so happy and so full of religion that they had their hair up, and they called it shaking their hair down.
Yeah. Well, my dad's sister, oldest sister, was Church of God that spoke in tongues, and all of that. And I've been to a church as a child and saw a lot of that happening, but they didn't handle snakes. When they outlawed them here in Bradley County, they turned them loose, and when I was about 9-year-old, there was a huge diamondback rattler right up here in Mouse Creek Valley, and they're not native to our area. And Dad said the snake handlers had turned them.
No.
So those are just childhood.
Well, thanks, Miss Sue. We always appreciate you calling.
And tell the professor I really appreciate his information.
Very good. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Here on the courthouse square for many, many years, we had snake handling churches every Saturday. I mean,
yes.
Yeah, they come up, and we've had a lot of people say that they'd seen them up there, and
said they start preaching, and then all of a sudden they'd be reaching for the box.
And they're standing across the street usually. Yeah. Deb, the Christmas parade, as far as we know, is still going on tonight here.
At 6:00, and it will follow its usual route. It'll start down at Bradley High School, and it'll go up 3rd Street, turn and go north on Ocoee Street, go around the monument, back down Broad Street, and then it'll come down Inman Street, turn on Key Street, south on Key Street, and go back to the high school. And we hope everybody will come out and support the efforts there of all the Main Street Cleveland folks and the Check Into Cash folks that put that on every year.
And also Pearl Harbor a few years ago. Just remembrance, we have one survivor of Pearl Harbor here, Mr. Allen.
And I always loved Mr. Mantu's story that he left Cleveland and joined the Navy, and he was going to this. He didn't want to go anyplace cold, so they sent him Pearl Harbor, and he thought, well, this is going to be boring, and it turned out to be quite the exciting trip. I want to know, Dr. Hood, how long was it before you encountered cornbread when you got here?
Right away, and also at the the Cornbread Festival in Scottsboro that they brought up. So,
oh yeah, that's
but cornbread's one of those things that's kind of unique to the area. And we had a friend from New Jersey that moved down to this area, and we kept teasing him about grits, and he finally said, "Okay, I'll try one."
That's funny.
You went. You found moonshine. I mean, and going around. Of course, in the remote areas, looking at the snake handling, you probably ran into the moonshine, and maybe some of them were the same people. I don't know.
I'd say 40 years ago, I mean, moonshine was getting to be a little bit rare at that time, wasn't it?
It was going down because, well, you know, the
bootlegging was
well,
popular.
It was harder to buy corn and buy sugar on large quantities without it being tracked, and you know that was the key thing. Is once they were able to track them, that's how you caught people, was the corn and the sugar usually.
And the trick was, of course, as they began to seriously enforce the laws, so that it became more and more difficult. But there's still the case in parts of Appalachia where you can find moonshine, and the most recent case is Popcorn, who, of course, made a mistake by getting publicity, and he had threatened that if he'd ever been caught and they were going to incarcerate him, he would kill himself. And in fact, he kept good on that promise.
Yes, he sure did.
And everybody knew Popcorn, and he was famous, and his moonshine was famous. And now, ironically, there's a firm selling Popcorn moonshine in a curious twist of fate.
Well, I got to taste some of his moonshine, actually, some of the original stuff that Mr. Don had in his little flask in his coat pocket. Yeah.
And again, Popcorn was famous, and people would come all over to get his moonshine. And it's, again, the interesting thing about Appalachia is there are many activities that are in defiance of the law, but the local community supports and sustains. And it's only when outsiders demand that the law be enforced that you get to issues such as moonshine and Popcorn now essentially being eliminated in Appalachia. It's extremely hard to do moonshine in a way that you can be under the radar and successful.
Well, I know, and our callers have heard us tell this story. I'm sure that I said I hadn't had any moonshine in a long time, and about 30 minutes later, a guy walked in and handed me a jar.
Handed me a jar?
Right, yeah. I'm going, good morning, you're live on Old Town Cleveland.
I just want to remind everybody that the parade is tonight at 6 o'clock.
All right.
Good.
Well, good. You going to be there?
Oh, yeah, with Belbo.
All right. You going to be on your devil outfit?
Oh, no.
Okay. You going to? Well, all you got to do is that red dress you wore at Halloween. All you got to do is pull it off, put a Santa hat on, and you got a Santa outfit.
That's good.
Well, I got my T-shirt with me in Santa's lap.
Yeah, there you after them younger men again.
No, I don't think he's very young. All right.
Thank you, Miss Ellen.
Yeah, but yeah.
I think with reality shows that being Appalachian has become more popular.
And I've actually advised people to avoid that, because the trouble with reality shows is if they're successful, then people get pressure to enforce laws. So, for instance, Andrew Hamlin was charged with possession of serpents, a Class 1 violation of possessing a dangerous venomous snake without a license, precisely because of the reality show. So when local authorities see you violating the law from their perspective and essentially being successful, that gives them the motivation to enforce charges against you. So in all of the Appalachian regions I know where there are churches, the local community is aware of it, supports it, the sheriff knows and does nothing about it. But if they were to get above the radar, do a reality show, then somebody's going to go and say, look, that's against the law, enforce the law, and then they'll have to do that. And I've understood, although I haven't seen it, there's evidently a reality show dealing with moonshiners that's relatively successful.
Mm-hmm.
And if that's true, then obviously the authorities who see that show are going to have tremendous pressure to go after and get those moonshiners.
Well, that's what Ron and I asked when we saw the show. We thought, okay, how are they doing this? Because they're not telling their exact locations, but it wouldn't take you take one.
They actually have in the moonshine. They actually have a law enforcement segment where they're trying to find the moonshiners. And I just keep saying, watch this show and you'll know where they are.
Exactly.
I mean, they are. But, if you lived in a small community and there's these three guys making moonshine, the chances are everybody in town knows who they are.
Right. And buys moonshine from them.
Yeah.
So the answer, again, is what's unique about Appalachian culture, I think, is that there's a kind of live and let live. And not a disrespect for the law, but a belief that the law is just unjust. You don't have a right to regulate my making of liquor. You don't have the right to tell me not to handle a serpent. But in fact, of course, courts do. They've given themselves that power. And then if you do a reality show and let people know you're handling serpents, then they're going to come after you. Mm-hmm. So, now Andrew Hamlin, to his credit, is interested in challenging the law. He wants to get the law changed. And so there could be, an unintended consequences, is that people might feel that even though they don't agree in serpent handling, people should have the right to do it. And that might get states to minimize or not regulate the practice.
Yeah, I don't see Tennessee changing because of, we're the super religious state, and pro or con. I mean, I'm not knocking it, but, it would be hard for them to say, oh, let's let them handle snakes. We're not going to pass gay marriages and anything else in Tennessee. So I'd say, that would almost be against religion of a politician to change the law.
Sure.
Now, I don't know about the courts do that, but, are the laws written so that it doesn't violate their constitutional right?
The Carson Springs case was appealed to the Tennessee State Supreme Court, and it made a split decision. And the split decision was the interpretation of you cannot handle a serpent in a fashion to harm self or other. And the question was, does it mean yourself or any other? And it was split 2-1 in favor of supporting the law. But then there was also a civil case where in the state of Tennessee, if you handle a serpent, they can get you for engaging in a public nuisance. So my guess is Tennessee will not, in any time soon, get rid of the law dealing with handling serpents in a fashion to endanger self or other, and certainly not on the public nuisance. So that the more the Tennessee people get publicity, the more likely they are to challenge the legal authorities to enforce the law.
Would you think Tennessee, and I don't want to think for our state politicians, someone needs to, but I don't know.
That'd be a good idea.
Yeah, but would they not be afraid to say that Tennessee, like Appalachian, is that we're a backward state, we're country folks, don't wear shoes and things of that nature, that if we did pass that we were that we'd be critical, the whole country would be critical of us.
Yeah, I do think that there's this stereotype, and we've hit on this a little bit, in which they think that this is a bizarre practice, and that it's a kind of religion that deserves to be abolished. But again, that's the prejudice against thinking that everybody must get on a modern agenda. And Appalachia has resisted that. And so I would argue that the practice of serpent handling, while it may seem bizarre to an outsider, is actually an integral part of this Appalachian culture. And one of the things that it represents to the Appalachian people is it takes back their sense of having power over nature, dominion over the land. So think from a psychological perspective of what it does to know that you can take this dangerous viper that everybody fears, that they know can maim and kill, and you can take it up in your hands and feel that you have power over nature. So I think the Appalachians are people who, a subset of them, are at ease with nature, live with nature, and live with nature on its terms. And therefore, while some people may call that backward, I think they would want to say they're simply resisting many of the errors of modernity.
That's right.
Good morning. You're live on Old Town Cleveland.
I'd like to ask the doctor if he ever heard of Shelton Laurel.
Shelton Laurel? No.
Yeah. It's about 15 miles out of Hot Springs.
Okay.
I lived up there. All my people still live up there.
Uh-huh.
And my uncles and them used to catch the snakes and sell them to them churches and stuff over there.
Uh-huh. But I don't think there was there ever a church at Shelton Laurel? If there was, I don't know about it.
Shelton Laurel, it's just, if you leave Hot Springs going toward Greenville, Tennessee, turn right on 212.
Yeah, sure.
And then you go across the mountain,
Uh-huh.
go back into Irwin, Tennessee.
Okay.
But no,
Well, there certainly are churches in that area, and, I wouldn't be surprised if they were selling churches to, like, the Marshall Church in North Carolina.
How much did you get for a snake?
I don't know, but I was up, one of my uncles one time, he made moonshine, and the guys come up there to pick up a little load, and there's 5 or 6 of us hanging around the back of a pickup truck,
Uh-huh.
and I kept hearing something, and I looked down in there, and that old boy said, what are you looking for? I said, I hear something in there. He said, they 7 rattlesnakes in that box right there.
I believe it.
Backed up real quick.
Yeah, it'd take you long to look at them.
Yeah.
Well,
That's when you get religion. Say, oh God.
Oh God.
Thank you for calling.
All right.
Bye-bye. I can't remember the title of the show, but there's a one on now that says Hillbilly something. And I love that show because these guys are living way up in the mountains. One of them's got a wife and some kids, and I don't think they have electricity or anything. But if he needs to smoke meat, he will pick up walnuts, turn it into walnut oil, sell the walnut oil to go buy the materials he needs to make his own homemade smoker out of an old refrigerator. I think that that's fabulous because that shows the independence and the ability for the Appalachian people to take care of themselves. I wish they would have called it something like Appalachian Inventor or something, but you have to put a title to get people to watch it.
Right, and they tend to use, one of the dangers of these shows is they pull off stereotypes. So hillbilly becomes, a kind of pejorative thing based upon the TV shows we've seen. And that's unfortunate because, again, one of the things that people argue is that many of the Appalachian people are not educated. And I always argue it depends what you mean by education.
It's where you are.
Some of the least intelligent people I know are tenured faculty members at a university. I refer to tenured faculty members as essentially being a no-kill dog pound. All right? And part of what the Appalachian people are is they're educated to their life. I'll give you an example from the psycho-religion that's instructive. The Amish won a very famous court case when the Supreme Court ruled they had the right to take their kids out of public education. They don't educate them beyond the 8th grade. And the dissenting view said, but you're allowing these people just to produce ignorance, people that won't function in the modern world. And the Supreme Court ruled, and the Amish argued effectively, we do educate our people. We educate our people to a form of life that they will sustain, that they know how to farm, but they don't need this other kind of thing. And I think it's a mistake to think that Appalachian, the people we're talking about, are uneducated. They're amazingly educated to sustaining a form of life. And there are very few people I know that could survive for a week on anything that the Appalachian people, many of, survive on normally. They are self-sufficient, they're independent, and they are educated to a form of life which they're trying to sustain. And if outsiders don't appreciate that, my argument has always been, that's fine, you don't have to, but why do you have to regulate a form of life that you don't live out of existence?
Are there homeless people in Appalachia, in the mountains?
No, it's hard to be homeless because you can live off the land. So the homeless people are largely a product of modernity in the big cities. Mm-hmm. And wherever you go in the big cities, you're homeless. But in Appalachia, if you were, quote, homeless, right, somebody would take you in. There's always a pot of beans, and they would share it with you. And you would also contribute. So you would help them do whatever it is they do. Mm-hmm. So there is a form of life in America that's disappearing, but I don't think will ever totally disappear, of people staying on their land, doing the best they can to be self-sufficient.
Well, no, it's the taxes that gets them, isn't it?
Taxes, regulations, you can't kill a hog. So the Appalachian people are finding it difficult to pass on their traditions because of extreme regulations. I know Appalachians who don't have Social Security numbers. I know Appalachians who still have been able to birth children without registering them. But in fact, it's almost totally disappearing. Appalachians would bury their people on the side of a hill, right? They're regulating that now out of existence.
No, it's against the law in Tennessee. You have to have you can bury on your land. You have to have a funeral director direct it, though.
Oh, really? That's
yes.
interesting.
Your own land.
You can do it on your own land, but you have to have a funeral director still oversee. You don't have to be embalmed unless you're going to be viewed. And so that's some of the rule. But once again, the other thing.
But again, the issue for many of the Appalachians is just all of these regulations and the sense in which they just have decided that you just can't regulate some things.
The
so you said you can't kill a hog? What's up with that?
There's all kinds of ruling of what you can...
TWRA.
I thought you were going to say TWRA.
And actually, TWRA has been extremely vigilant.
You're talking about wild hogs.
In Tennessee on not allowing you now to own a serpent. And the reason is it's a venomous thing. You need to be licensed. But the trick is they won't give you a license to own the serpent.
Mm-hmm.
So again, my argument has always been, if that is the law, there ought to be a religious exemption. For instance, think of a ritual that everybody accepts. Catholics take communion, and they take it with real wine. And you can take communion in a dry county. And you can take communion on Sunday in an area that doesn't allow liquor to be sold on Sunday, because it's not treated as liquor, it's treated as a religious exemption. So the serpent handlers are not collecting serpents for pets or endangering people. It's part of an integral portion of a religious ritual. And even if the individual person is not allowed to own a serpent as a pet, for instance, that may make some sense, but it shouldn't be used to regulate serpent handlers who use it as a religious ritual mandated out of the Gospel of Mark.
One thing that, the Great Depression, when it came through the 20s, didn't affect Appalachians because they were already poor, and they didn't. It was people just got closer to them instead of them getting closer to the rich.
Yeah, or it might be phrased another way, that they're not poor, they have an enriched life, and they're not dependent upon the kind of things that would impoverish them.
Yeah, and they probably didn't know the Great Depression was even going on. Some of them up in the
Well,
mountain.
my dad was 10 years old, 11 years old when the Depression hit, and he lived on a farm here in Bradley County that basically could produce everything that they needed. Sure. And he said, all those folks from the city kept coming to visit and stay with them. It's the only thing he noticed different.
And in Appalachia, there are people, like I said, who've used the raw materials of the area to build their houses, who raise their own crops, who sustain their own chickens, and they can be essentially self-sufficient. The biggest thing that gets Appalachians right now is if they travel and have to have gasoline, because you have to purchase gasoline.
What about immunizations? Are the folks up in the mountains getting their kids immunized?
Yeah, because that's another example where the imposition comes from the state, which demands you get vaccinated to attend school. But in Appalachia, one of the things that's very common is homeschooling, because they want their kids to maintain a tradition that can only be maintained if it's sustained by a strong family structure. And again, the serpent handling tradition survives not by converts, which is the exception, but they grow from within by maintaining their families. Serpent handlers tend to grow up, handle serpents. They tend to marry other people from a serpent handling family and continue the tradition from within, not from without.
If the law was changed today, would we see a large increase in serpent handling, or do you think that's still just going to be a very small part of our society?
I think it will always be a small part of our society, because nobody will believe in sustaining a ritual that can maim and kill. But I think the serpent handling tradition will survive regardless of the law, because if laws are put against it, and if they try to enforce them, they'll simply go underground and survive that way.
If you were an elected official today, would you vote to rescind the law?
Yeah, I would argue that it's the right for consenting adults to engage in this ritual, and that's the only criteria I would do is consenting adults. An example would be the Supreme Court has allowed very interesting religious practices. Christian Scientists can reject medicine. Now, while they can't withhold it from their children, the court has ruled that if you're a Christian Scientist and you need medical treatment, but you don't believe in that medical treatment, you do not have to receive it. So I would think serpent handlers should
Well,
fall
Dr.
under-
Hood, this has been the most interesting story, and we must have you back sometime in the future. That you come in between your trips to Poland and all these places you've been going. We finally had to narrow it down to a weekend that he could come. Folks, be sure to tune in next weekend. Ron and I are going to take a very unusual day off on next Saturday, and our good friend Doug Mizell will be in here doing the show. And we think he will be talking about the pre-removal times in this area, that a lot of Cherokee stuff, and you guys will enjoy that. And
then the 21st, our great program that day is going to be Christmas movies. Which one is the best? We're going to have an argument.
I'm sure you will.
Hey, go ahead, caller.
Yeah, this is T-Bandy.
Hey, T-Bandy.
I just wanted to let you know that Jenny and I are going to be singing at the senior citizens.
Okay. Monday would it be Monday?
Birthday, 12th.
Monday at 10 o'clock, you and Janie will be singing at the Senior Center?
Thursday.
Pardon me?
Thursday.
Thursday, excuse me. Thursday at the Senior Center.
Yeah, we be singing at 1 o'clock.
How Marilyn going to be 75?
Yeah, she's going to be 75.
All right, thanks.
Thanks, T. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
All right,
Bye-bye.
We always try to tell people is that you've got to restore history, get those old pictures from out under those shoe boxes and out of the closets, and put your names on the back of them, and ask your grandpa and your grandma who these are, and take a recorder and record your grandpa and your grandparents now. People will always remember Pearl Harbor. Of course, on Pearl Harbor Day, we may not remember about Aunt Pearl, but we've got to, the things that happen in your neighborhood, in your family, will not be saved unless you write it down and you document it. You've got to do that, and you got to do it today. Don't wait till tomorrow. We'll see you next week here on Old Town Cleveland. Had a great day. Thanks.
You are listening to WOOP-LP, Cleveland, Tennessee. WOOP FM is a broadcasting service of the Traditional Music Resource Center, and we play America's original music.
You need money overnight? Check into cash. Your time is tight. .com. Bank account's too low? Check into cash. So where do you go?